Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits VOD, countless others end up DOA. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Korngut. I am the managing editor of Dread Central. I am also a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. As you've noticed, every Tuesday for the month of March, we have been celebrating the lost projects and unproduced films of the legendary George A. Romero within this audio series I'm calling Romero Unseen. Now, today is the last and final and fifth episode of this miniseries, and we're going to take a bit of a different route by celebrating all things Romero. We're going to touch base on what our favorite Romero movies are, and then we're also going to dig into a number of other unproduced Romero projects over the years that we didn't really have time to give a full episode to, but we still want to talk about. Joining me, as always, for Romero Unseen is Adam Charles Hart. He is the author of Raising the Dead, the work of George A. Romero, which is out now from Oxford University Press, so you should definitely head to our show notes and make sure that you pick up a copy. Adam, welcome back to yet another episode of Romero Unseen. How's it going?
Going great. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm good. I'm kind of sad, to be honest, that this is our last episode. I've really enjoyed Romero University.
Yeah, I'll have to hurry up and write another book so I can come back.
Yes, I think that that's wise. So for those who maybe are only tuning in for the first time today, can you just introduce yourself to the Development Hell audience?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be one of the people who processed George Romero's archives. I've written about horror and, taught horror studies and such for years, and was just kind of in the right place at the right time. I live in Pittsburgh and was working at Pitt when this archive came in, and it was the most fun I've ever had in my entire life, digging through all of these boxes that nobody had opened in 50 years in some cases. They probably opened it, but didn't go through them well. You know what I mean? So as I've said on previous episodes, like my colleague Ben and I are going through this stuff, and I'm like, wait, okay, so what's mainly in here are scripts for movies that we've never heard of. And we're like, there's another one and another one and another one. And very soon we realized, like, oh, this George Romero guy could never stop writing. He just kept making scripts, and all the points in his filmography when it looks like, oh, he wasn't doing anything for 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, he wrote like 36 scripts during that point, and when he wasn't doing that, he was writing outlines and developing projects, and like he was just bursting with ideas at all times. So the book started as just a way for me to share how excited I was about all of this stuff, which, it reveals this artist who worked in horror mainly, but who had all of these different interests, like the scripts. There's a lot of horror stuff, but there's a lot of there's mysteries and comedies and a couple westerns and some science fiction stuff with spaceships and cyborgs and some action movies, some detective stuff. He
Mhm.
just had all of these interests. And as I was writing what I thought would be this book that was just kind of like, hey, here's all this cool shit I found that you should know about, like all
Mhm.
this great work that Romero is doing that he just never got a chance to film.
Mhm.
I realized that this was giving me a whole new perspective on the movies that we've all seen a million times, like the early drafts of Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, the early drafts of Martin, the other stuff that he was working on at that time, and the stuff that he'd been working on leading up to Night of the Living Dead. It was giving me all of these new um I guess it sounds kind of pretentious to say it was giving me all of these new insights, but it
Mhm.
really was. Like
Mhm.
the original plan for the book was not to touch any of those because like who has anything else to say about Night of the Living Dead at this point? Like it's over 50 years old and has been written about, more than maybe any other movie in horror history
Mhm.
besides Psycho,
Mm, I
basically.
mean, it's arguable, yeah.
Um, but I do feel like it gave me something new to say about it. So, you know, people can judge for themselves, but
Yeah.
hopefully, at least at the very least, my excitement about all this stuff comes through on the pages.
And I'm glad that you brought up Night of the Living Dead because while, yeah, there's just countless resources on it out there, I think that fans are always hungry to hear about it. I know that I am. It's just such a fascinating movie, not just because it's, political or is doing something new or interesting. It's just so like spooky and classic, and it's just like one of my favorites, which gets me into thinking we're talking about two of our favorite Romero projects of all time. And I'm going to start with mine, which is Night of the Living Dead, but the 1990 remake. You are like the PhD of Romero, but I was wondering, could I try to give us a little bit of like a brief history of this film?
Of course, go for it.
Okay, but make sure you fill in the blanks. So Night of the Living Dead, which I think is also known as George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, is a 1990 like remake of the original film directed by Mr. Tom Savini. This is the first time Tom Savini would ever direct. And of course, everyone knows him as basically like the master of gore in modern horror. He has done the practical gore effects for basically every of your favorite classic horror films. And this was the first time this dude was finally getting to direct and really take charge completely. It had a great cast. So it starred Tony Todd in the lead role as Ben. And we also
Pre
have.
Candyman Tony
Oh,
Todd.
is it? That's right. This is 1 or 2 years before
Yeah,
Candyman. That's true.
this was
Um,
his first horror movie.
that's so interesting. Okay, we're gonna just for literally 1 second. I have to ask: did this lead to Candyman? Do you think, or do you think that no?
Well, I mean, I feel like this is what put him in the like realm of
Limelight.
horror for
Got it, got it,
casting
got it, got it.
agents.
Well, because
But
Candyman was so soon after, it's hard like, it could have been nearly at the same time. Hard to know.
yeah,
So,
the one thing that I would say is that I love his performance in this movie
me too.
because after Candyman, as much as I love Tony Todd, it's very clear that like, you know, directors saw him in Candyman and were like, "Do that.
Yeah,
Be menacing and mysterious."
you're right. It
And he's
did
able
follow
to
him.
like he's able to be heroic, he's able to like be kind of a dick and
He's
like
human as
complex.
and just as
Yeah,
Ben was the first time around, he's,
yeah,
or, like, such a real character. This is, like,
yeah,
just a very interesting person to watch in this very, like, intense, interesting situation. Um,
yeah.
but to finish off, like the
You're talking
original.
about the cast.
Yeah.
No, but we got through one name. You were like, "The
Well, okay,
cast is
oh, you're so fucking
amazing."
right. The only other name I wanna mention is Patricia Tallman as, oh my god, help me out, Barbara?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. What I have to be honest with you, unfortunately, I actually don't know much about Patricia Tallman. I think, like, 10 years ago, I remember going on her IMDb and, like, seeing interesting things, but I could not remember anything now, so you're gonna have to help me out. But she is such a fascinating reimagination of Barbara. She's definitely, has more autonomy. She's definitely more complex. She feels a
She's a
little bit
badass.
she's badass. She feels post Ellen Ripley a little bit, but not in a reductive way. And she's got such cool hair. Her haircut's so fucking cool. What
Yeah.
else is she from?
So her first movie was Knight Riders, the George
Okay.
Romero Ren Fair bicycle jousting
Yes, we've talked
bicycle
about it. Yeah.
motorcycle jousting. I like the idea of a bicycle jousting movie though.
Also funny. Both funny. Both funny.
And I
Okay, so
think
she
she
was
was
in that.
also a stunt woman.
Oh, okay.
And then she worked pretty steadily in TV mostly
Okay.
after
So she,
this.
she didn't really break out into like mainstream sort of lead roles.
No, but she was always working. Like
Good.
there's a lot of entries on her IMDb page.
She's so
But
fascinating.
you're
Yeah.
overlooking also in the cast is Bill Moseley, Chop Top himself,
Oh,
um,
that's right.
taking the Russ Streiner role as Johnny, and Tom Tolles from Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, who gives a very, when I rewatched this recently, and also, for book stuff, have been rewatching Night of the Living Dead for more than one screening I've
Mm-hmm.
introduced. And the thing about the original is that Harry, the like white middle class patriarch, who's a real dick to Ben and
Mm-hmm.
everybody, and he wants to go in the basement, etc. He's kind of pitiful, and anytime that he threatens Ben, because Ben is played by Dwayne Jones, who's like impossibly charismatic and so handsome,
Oh yeah.
so handsome that anybody who's interested in dudes, and maybe some people who don't, who see that movie for the first
And
time,
you're like,
they're like,
whoa.
wow, who's that? What
I
else was he
know.
in?
Have you seen Gondra and Hess?
Yeah, he's exceptional in that. Yeah, he's
Whoa, that's
great.
a sexy movie.
Yeah. But anyways, so like in the original, the guy who's squaring up against Dwayne Jones gives like a low-key hilarious performance as this like pitiful
Yeah.
little man.
Yes.
And the thing is, when you cast Tom Tolles, like anytime that Tom Tolles from Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer says something like vaguely aggressive, you're like,
Ooh.
somebody like lock that man up, tie him up in the
Yeah,
basement,
it's
and
dangerous.
put blindfolds over him. He's clearly dangerous.
And I think that's actually a really good evolution for this role because this archetype, this mega type, is so dangerous and really scary. So making
Yeah.
him that way, I think, actually makes a lot of sense. For those who don't know, I'll just say really quickly both the original film and this film are just about a group of strangers that meet up randomly and have to survive a zombie apocalypse in one house together. And some decide to stay upstairs, some go downstairs, and, interpersonal drama unfolds. So yeah, this one came out. I just want to say yes to your point of these other two actors in this film. Kind of an Expendables of horror, really. Like a little bit before we knew who they were, especially for Tony Todd. But whoa,
Yeah.
like yeah, Expendables of horror energy. Columbia Pictures put it out on October 19th, 1990. A lot of nines, and I don't think people liked it. I think that the reviews were negative, which is really too bad that critics didn't learn their lesson from the original Night of the Living Dead and see this for what it was. I think definitely it's had a reevaluation in recent years, but that doesn't help it when it came out and it needed box office, monies. I think it made about 6 million against a budget of 4-ish. So I don't know if that's necessarily a flop, but I can only imagine that that's not exactly like thrilling, and it's just too bad
I
because
think
it's so good.
it did fine.
It did fine.
Like not
Okay.
enough that it was like,
Yeah.
nobody lost money, everybody made money, which was like
No sequel.
the reason why this was made was because, like for the distributor of Night of the Living Dead first refused to give the producers their share of the profits.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a couple of years, when people figured out that it was in the public domain because the distributor had fucked up and taken the copyright notice off when they changed the title, because it was filmed under the title Night of the Flesh Eaters.
Uh-huh.
So this is how this is the state of copyright law in 1968 when it was released, which doesn't make any fucking sense.
Wait. So do you think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, that this could then feasibly be known as Night of the Living Dead, George's version? Do you know
Jesus
what I'm
Christ.
referencing here?
I'm gonna just move on.
No,
We can
so you
talk
do
about
get the
this
reference.
later.
I'm sorry, you
Yeah.
have to say it works. It is kind of what it is. They're getting their money this time.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was also like, so it was less driven by George needing the money, like
Uh-huh.
than everybody else who worked on it. Like for George Romero, this was a calling card that, like he was in the wilderness for a while, but he did get like big movies,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like he
He was
was
the
able to
creative, yeah.
work and people were funding his movies, even if it wasn't everything he wanted to make, etc. But for the other people who put so much time and effort and blood and sweat into Night of the Living Dead, they really didn't see all that much out of it. So this was an opportunity to the executive producers include John Russo and Russell Streiner, who, where John Russo co-wrote the original script, and he's in it as a zombie. Russ Streiner did a ton of different things on the set, and he played Johnny. And, it was like a way to give his collaborators a payday, but also it was increasingly clear that because it was in the public domain, even though the original producers were they were trying to be proactive in suing folks who tried to claim they were Night of the Living Dead. They had some success with that. Eventually somebody's going to figure out a way to make it. So it might as well be them, right? And then a couple of folks could get a paycheck. Tom Savini could get his first directing gig. A bunch of cast and crew from Pittsburgh could have a
Yeah. And
job.
you're making the same story, but instead of for $3, you have $4 million to play with.
Yeah, right. And George didn't have to direct it, so
Even better, you were telling me a little bit earlier today that, it seemed less like a less stressful experience for George and a more stressful experience for Tom. Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Oh yeah. So I don't know how prevalent this rumor is, but I have been asked by more than one person because, I do Romero stuff. Is it true that George Romero ghost directed, secretly directed the Night of the Living Dead remake? Which, if I'm Tom Savini, I should be simultaneously both insulted but also complimented by, because what they're saying is oh, this is very good.
Yeah,
a
it
first
is.
time director should probably not be able to be that good first time out.
Yeah,
But
it's rude and it's
first of all,
condescending.
there's no evidence supporting that. But second of all, I've seen a bunch of behind the scene photographs. And anytime George Romero is on set, he is having the best time in the world. He is, declaring it 6 o'clock somewhere and, sipping something and just
Being
letting it
goofy.
all hang out. He's having a great time. No worries, no responsibilities. Any picture of Tom Savini, who is, by the way, rocking a pretty amazing ponytail at this point.
Nice.
Yeah. Just looks like the most stressed out a human being has ever been. And he
Aw,
always
babe.
has binders of stuff in front of him. He is clearly figuring all this shit out.
Yeah.
Supposedly he did not have a good time directing this movie. And so I guess that's why he didn't do another one. But that is a shame because this is a good movie.
So, and it doesn't have the legacy it deserves yet. I came across it a little bit later in life, and as I said, I do think that reassessment has happened, but I still don't think this really gets the flowers that it's owed.
It should. It definitely needs to be reclaimed by people who want to see a movie about like a fucking badass lady like yelling at men who suck and kicking their asses.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
she is just so underrated. Maybe it's because of the original character. Barbara has a little bit, of has some baggage, I guess, but
Well,
this
I mean, it's
portrayal is so
very
good.
clear that like this was an opportunity for Romero to kind of like deal with the stuff that had bothered him about the original for a while.
Okay.
Like the original Barbara, like she was clearly written as this kind of like audience surrogate where they pull the rug out from underneath the audience, like she's the pretty blonde lady. She's going to be our heroine that we're going to like root for throughout or whatever.
Yeah.
And like she survives the initial zombie attack, but then gets to this like, farmhouse in the middle of Evan City
Yeah.
and goes completely catatonic and is a non-entity who can barely like react to the world around her for the rest of it.
I'm sorry to
I
interrupt you, but
get,
I just remembered, yeah, it's her brother. That's the Mosley role. I forgot for a second there. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
he gets the famous line, and that's such a famous scene, the opening scene from the original, that I do think the opening scene from this does get to exist in our zeitgeist a little bit more than the rest of the movie, because like there's
Yeah,
gifts from that opening and all of that.
yeah. Um, But like, so like after that initial scene when this actress, this character who we thought was going to be like, it's like a very clear sort of like post psycho
Mhm.
re-envisioning of like a horror movie structure, right?
Mhm.
Like here's the pretty lady we're gonna root for, and then immediately after she survives the first thing and we've been rooting for her, turns out that she sucks. She's not gonna do anything. And we're gonna get really annoyed with her and instead root for the black guy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which works
It,
100% for when it came
it
out.
does.
Um,
And like all of that makes sense,
yeah.
but after the fact, having it pointed out to them like, well, having this woman character who's so scared that she's just like a burden on everybody and can't
Yeah. It's
like do
not.
anything, that's not great.
No.
And clearly Romero had reflected on that and he's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
a point.
And not every woman character needs to be Mary Sue levels of like competent, but because of when it came out, it just felt like this wayfish, helpless, damsel. And he's so cognizant of, he's just so cognizant of politics that I can imagine that it would bother him after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, if the original is largely about, not just the disintegration of society, but this like you know, really viscerally communicating the fear about like being a black man in America, and particularly like in rural America.
Oof.
Um, the the remake is about being a woman. She's surrounded by
Mhm.
dudes who are awful for every different way you could imagine a dude being awful.
Yep.
There's one of them in this movie somewhere. Which is an achievement considering like there's not that many speaking roles, but they really map it out really well.
and
Yeah,
and unlike the original, as I was saying, like it's not campy, it's not for fun, it's not played for laughs. It's like disturbing and realistic and like scary.
yeah, yeah. It's a good movie. I like it a lot.
I like it too. But on that note, I'd like to move on to, what your potential favorite Romero title is. And we talked about it before we hit record today. And it's not that it's like definitively your favorite Romero film, but you are going to bring to the table Martin. Do you want to tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about this movie?
So yeah. So first thing that I'll say is that Martin has been very difficult to watch for a long time,
Hmm.
but miraculously, possibly,
Mm-hmm.
illegally, it's
Okay.
streaming on Tubi.
Oh.
And even with commercial interruptions. Like, I can't recommend this movie enough.
Wow.
I love this fucking movie, even though there's sort of it's Romero's most disturbing, upsetting movie in like a not fun way. Um, it's basic like it's a vampire story, but it's really basically about like a serial killer
Uh-huh.
who's compelled to kill for sexual reasons that he can't quite articulate, and like he just like feels a psychological need. He can't do it or else he starts to feel sick and whatever. And the amazing thing about the movie is that all of that upsetting and disturbing stuff about what Martin the character doesn't really interfere with the movie's ability to empathize with him. And
Okay.
like I mean empathize versus sympathize in the sense of like you can feel for him. Like he is pitiful, he is sick, he can't help this, but at the same time the stuff that he does is horrifying. And that's something that like you don't see very often in any kind of movie, let alone a horror movie. Like that sort of nuance and complexity. And I love that about it. It also makes it a tough sell. It's not fun in the way that like Dawn of the Dead is fun, you know?
I
There's no
haven't
slapstick zombies falling down escalators.
I haven't seen it, but do you think in some ways it kind of predates what we now call prestige or elevated horror with A24 and Neon and Hereditary and the Babadook and all that?
Yeah, I mean all of Romero's stuff does, but this feels like it could be produced by A24.
Right? I haven't
And
seen it, but it looks
like
like it.
it was distributed by the same company that distributed Eraserhead. Like that's a sort of like if you think about that as like Eraserhead being a horror-ish movie
Gotta watch
that's
this.
also really arty and avant-garde,
Uh-huh.
that's kind of that's an A24 roster of films
And was
right
it
there, you
cool?
know?
Like, was this like considered to be, you know, like trendy
It
or I don't
no,
know.
it never really got a chance to hit.
Got it.
Um, I think that the unexpected people in Romero's circle blame Eraserhead basically.
That's so funny.
um, but in their defense, like you know, it was a small distributor that did not have much resources, so seeing them put it behind this like the weirdest movie they'd ever seen
Yeah. It was a
and
good
it
bet.
somehow
Yeah.
succeeding makes
Yeah.
it feel like, well, couldn't you have like done some of that for us maybe? um
Yeah, they should have.
but
I
yeah,
wish they had.
it barely got a release. It didn't play in most cities, and like for copyright reasons that are complicated and awful, like it's not on Blu-ray in the United States. I think it might be, or it's coming out in the UK or whatever, but it's a legitimately great movie. I think that it's his greatest achievement.
Wow.
Um
That's a lot considering you are the guy that wrote the book on Romero.
yeah, well, I mean it's not all that well known.
Huh?
But I'm always willing to talk Martin with people.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that, my favorite of Romero was Night of the Living Dead remake directed by Tom Savini. But am I right to say that Martin was the first collaboration between Savini and Romero?
Yes, but
Oh,
that was not the first time that they met. Have I told
oh,
you that before?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Remind me.
So they actually met for a project, a film that Romero was trying to get made in the mid 1960s called Wine of the Fawn, a very like
Mm,
arty, pretentious
yeah,
Ingmar Bergman-esque thing that has like, I don't know, I can talk about it
I hate the title.
endlessly. It's fascinating. One of the greatest endings of any scripts I've ever read,
Oh, okay.
very uneven up till then. Um, But,
Truly.
like, there was nothing about this, like, you know, this script about, an innocent youth in medieval England, encountering various temptations and
Oh God.
threats that, like, seemed, to equal profits to potential funders,
Oh
so they never got enough money, even though
yeah,
they wrote it, like, with budget in mind. Um,
classic Romero.
yeah, so that was never made, but also they didn't cast Savini, um, who
Um,
was young,
that's
and
what I
he
should
ended
think.
up, like, that's before he went to Vietnam, and when he
Oh,
got back, like, he looked up Romero, and they got together and worked
had
on.
such a crazy, amazing
Yeah.
career
And
together.
my understanding is that, like, he was an actor first
Hmm.
who assisted with makeup, and then,
That
like,
makes
he
sense.
was so good at the makeup.
I love it. You gotta do what you're good at. What a babe.
I live around the corner from Tom Savini, like,
Oh
he's,
shit.
I don't know, only a few blocks away. I don't know how much I've never spoken to him in my life.
Uh-huh.
Um, I don't know how much time he spends in Pittsburgh, but, like, everybody knows what house is Tom Savini's.
Cool.
Everybody knows, or everybody knew up until a few years ago, that, like, if you ever wanted to see him, just hang out at the Bloomfield pool in the summer, and he would frequently be there.
Oh, cool.
Um, just hanging out. He's a real Pittsburgh guy. But
He's
also
Mr.
everybody knew that you don't say anything to him because, like, he's a shy private guy,
Uh-huh.
and the reputation is, like, it's not that he's not nice, but that if, like, you're in a coffee shop and he's there, if you start walking towards him with, like, an air of purpose, he
He
will
gets scared.
just stand up and
You know what? And that's
walk
his
out of the
right. And
cafe.
that's his right to do. Imagine
I
being an introvert celebrity. Hell on earth. The
Yeah.
last question, though, before we move away from Martin, is I understand that there was a bit of a controversy in the UK with the release of this movie. Does that sound familiar?
I mean, yeah, it was one of, a bunch of films that were controversial for various reasons.
Hmm.
It is a disturbing, like I said, it is a very disturbing movie, but it's not particularly,
Bad.
graphic. Like,
Yeah.
it's the ideas that are disturbing.
Hmm. It looks.
Um,
It looks it like just the idea, and I've never seen it, but of like a cute sort of teenage heartthrob type that like thinks he's a vampire and like literally kills people and sucks their blood, but like this is a real person. That's gross. I love it. I have to watch it.
yeah, it's amazing. So the original version of Martin, which is my favorite discovery uh from the archive, maybe, that, like, I made and, like, discovered and put, like, connected all the dots myself,
Hmm.
um was that the first version of Martin was an abandoned fragment of a novel that Romero was working on in the early 70s
Wow.
about a dissatisfied but narcissistic middle-aged businessman. And then he got one chapter in, and that's all there was. But the
Interesting.
character was named Martin Matthias. And
Uh-huh.
there was at the end of the fragment, there's a page of notes that seems to be listing possibilities of where to take this character. And there's nothing supernatural or horror in the fragment, but
Hmm.
there's a few supernatural horror genre ideas in this page of notes.
That's fucking
He
cool.
picks it up a couple of years later with a character named Martin Matthias as a middle-aged man who suddenly, like, has a late in life onset of vampirism. And it's a very clear metaphor for addiction, like a middle-aged dude who's spiraling because of, like, alcohol or cocaine or something like that.
Hmm.
um and the thing that's closest to is Bruiser,
Uh-huh.
Romero's first Toronto movie.
How dare you?
And it's interesting. There's a couple of different versions of it. He doesn't write a full script. It's just a treatment. And there's one version that's short, that's just like an idea for a movie about like what like realistically it would be like to be a vampire. Which means like being immortal, so you can't like have any sort of a public profile or any sort of permanence, and like how you would be able to kill people and feed off them without drawing attention to yourself. And like the portrait that emerges in just like these few pages is of like this blurry, depressing, like gritty existence of almost like like a perpetual like hobo who always lives like in squalor, moving constantly, never having any like fixed address, but like metaphorically riding the rails of society.
Michael Myers in Halloween Ends. Keep going. I'm sorry.
That's not a reference that I get fully, but that's okay. We should move on.
Okay.
But anyways, at that point it was called Blood, and it was like announced, like, there were advertisements for it, like, coming soon, George Romero's new movie Blood. And I don't know why it didn't happen. It was going to be produced by a dude who had, I think at that point, exclusively been doing American distribution for Italian horror movies.
Kind of makes sense.
It does. And that connection may have led to a couple of things in Romero's career, possibly including Dawn of the Dead.
I was just gonna...
It's just there's like no way to entangle that at this point. But like it may be that just like the distributor thought that he would be better at producing than he was, and didn't end up like raising enough money or whatever. But there's no real explanation for why it didn't happen.
Okay.
When he finally writes a script a couple of years later, it's because he wants to make a goddamn movie. Like, it's not like in the scheme of things, not all that long. But so he makes Night in 67 into 68, comes out in 68. And then after a couple of years makes There's Always Vanilla, Season of the Witch, and The Crazies, like bam, 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 real quick. And basically by 1972, he's washed up because all three of those are flops or don't get distribution. Season of the Witch and Crazies get they do get recuperated later. People discover them, but like at the time, nothing, no money. And George is super in debt. The initial group that was kind of a cooperative, very like Midwestern hippie in the sense that like they're very practical, but also are like, communal, collaborative, everybody gets a voice. Like that all breaks up. They had been together for over a decade, and George has to start over with a new producer, raising money, figuring out a way to get out of debt and all of that. And so it's a few years, Dawn of the Dead and Martin both come out 78, 79. He starts working in earnest on Martin in 76. So that's like after 4 years of making commercials and trying to get productions off the ground and making stuff for TV, he's like, I just got to fucking make a movie. And he makes Martin because he can make it for really cheap with footage that basically he embezzles from TV projects.
Good for him.
Just some very creative accounting.
He got the bag. And I'm guessing that's why they made the lead role, like a teenager, like a heartthrob type.
No, actually, like he still wrote it as a middle-aged dude. But then the story is that he sees a college student in a school play. And is like, I should cast him. and
Wow.
so he rewrites the role for John Amplas.
I
Um,
think that was probably the right move.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like everything changes. This is also like a really good indication of how Romero worked. Like he was always open to new ideas,
Mhm.
whether that was like something from an actor or somebody behind the set, behind the scenes, just like sitting around on the set like extras or whatever. He would always talk to them about stuff, and he wasn't too precious about the script, to the point that like characters and scenes could
Good.
be like drastically reimagined, but also like you know I mean, casting a teenager for a role written for a middle-aged dude is not like, in America, it's more loaded, or it's less loaded, I guess. Um, but it's not all that different than casting Dwayne Jones, a black man, for a
You know
role
uh-huh.
in Night of the Living Dead that was, if you don't know, was originally written as like a stereotypical redneck Southern type.
Mhm.
Um, so he was
It's
just like open to whatever inspiration, whatever
well,
like good fortune brought to him.
and also, like,
He
having a teenager speak what was supposed to be the words of a middle-aged man might even give some, like, weight to the idea that, like, could he be a vampire?
Yeah, it makes it really interesting. Amplas's performance is remarkable in that movie.
Well, I mean,
Um,
if you're like me and you have not seen this movie, sounds like it's on Tubi. Get out there and watch it because I'm
yeah,
definitely going to soon.
the
Um,
streaming service for the people,
I'm
Tubi, owned
it.
by
You
Fox
joke.
News or whatever it's owned by.
Well, oh, that's too bad. But you joke, but it is like it is the zone for horror. Like it's so impressive what they have on there,
Yeah.
and like I am just so grateful as a horror fan for Tubi. And if you're listening to this, maybe just like give us an ad or something. And on that note, I thought maybe it would, be elegant to end off this whole series by touching base on some of the other unmade projects from Romero that maybe we didn't have time to do in as an individual episode, but still deserve to be talked about because they are just so fascinating. We're going to be talking about a bunch of Stephen King adaptations. We're going to talk about an original project called oh no, we're going to be talking about a project
Copperhead.
called Copperhead
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and a comedy, I believe, called Monster Mash, and then
Yeah.
also something interesting called The Golem. So to start us off today, I thought maybe we could dig into the Stephen King adaptations that didn't end up happening. For those who don't know, Romero had been developing his own version of Salem's Lot, The Stand, Pet Cemetery, It, The Girl Who Loved
Children of the Corn.
Children of the Corn, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, From a Buick 8, and I'm guessing more. So he has like had his hand at adapting Unmade King like nobody else. And as a huge King fan, I find that so fascinating. Of all of these titles, like which ones come to mind for you for like fascinating development stories?
So, first of all, like Stephen King was a huge Romero fan pretty early on. Like he especially loved Dawn of the Dead, and like that's why they worked together for Creepshow.
Cool.
And there was a point where King basically wanted Romero to be his
Movie
his
guy.
adapter, like his Mike Flanagan,
Got it.
like
Got it.
at that
Cool.
point, like every movie would at least go by George, like he'd get the first crack at it.
Cool.
But you know how Stephen King writes like 8,000 page novels all the time?
Mm-hmm.
They had trouble getting funding for somebody like George Romero, who had been working in the indie world for movies that were not particularly respected by Hollywood,
Right.
even if they made money. And so like my understanding, and I should say, like, there are, I'm sure Stephen King himself could correct a lot of this, and there are producers who could. This is all sort of partial information, but from what I've been able to piece together, um, uh, there were just like they were unable to get together the necessary money for something like The Stand, which is a tough thing to adapt into a feature film, especially if, like, you know, you want to get you want to get in and out in 2 hours for the goddamn Stand. Like,
What is it?
that kind
The
of,
fucking Dark Tower 2017? Yeah. No, it doesn't work.
yeah, no, I don't think that it works, but also I think if it's going to work as a feature, it needs to be 3 hours and, like, elaborate.
Which I'm
And
down
nobody is
for.
willing to give that money to Romero. And almost every Stephen King novel in like through the 1980s was attached to Romero at some point,
It
you
looks
know?
like it, yeah.
They loved working together for Creepshow, which is a movie that I adore. I love Creepshow so much.
One of the best.
I'm glad that it's finally kind of like assumed its rightful place in the canon, in the pantheon
Are you saying
of
it wasn't loved by fans the way that it is
no, no,
now?
no, no, no,
Oh.
not at all. It was like it did fine.
Oh, I hear you.
you know, like it did fine. It
It
wasn't
wasn't
a
a smash.
huge hit.
Yeah.
Um, it
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of like, and people thought of it fondly, some people, but it's not until like the last 10-15 years that you could be like, wait, what? You've never seen Creepshow? It's the greatest movie ever made, and not have
Kind of
people like
is.
say, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, yeah,
And it got a
that's
fucking theatrical sequel, which I'm still kind of amazed by. And we've talked about it before. I'm not going to get into it long, but it's worth it for The Raft. The Raft is the scariest fucking segment of any movie. So I love
it's
Creepshow.
pretty great. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
But so the projects, the King projects that got the furthest along that Romero was working on, were It and Pet Cemetery.
Mm.
And then of course he makes The Dark Half, which is,
Oh, yeah.
it's a compromised movie that Romero had a terrible time on. It was fighting with both the studio and, from what I hear, the star as well. I feel like I'm getting into gossip territory saying that, but
We
like
love it.
I don't think that he, like, and Timothy Hutton got along at all. But it's not just like a clash of personality. Like, the star was like refusing to work for George Romero.
Fuck you,
Poor
Dalton.
fucking guy. Poor George.
Fuck
Um,
you, James Bond.
no, that's Timothy Dalton.
Wait, who is this?
Hutton.
I don't know the difference. Oh, no. I'm
It's
sorry.
fine. It's fine.
I
It's
love
fine.
that. Okay,
Um,
yeah, so it didn't really happen again the way that it happened the first time around with Creepshow between these two, which is a bit of a shame.
so the I can talk a little bit about those two projects, but first of all, like, there's two kinds of King projects for Romero. One of them is Creepshow, where Stephen King writes the script, and like that is the almost the only time in his career when Romero does not work on the script at all.
Mhm.
Um, like, he worked on creative side of, like, I'm sure there's some feedback between him and King, and there is, like obviously like the visual side of things and all of that, but he doesn't tinker with Stephen King's scripts in the same way that he would for anybody else. Um, and then there's adaptation. So that's one kind. And then there's adaptations of King's novels, where if King was not the person writing the actual script, then Romero felt, the freedom to change things, to elaborate on things, and like become a contributing writer to the script. So Pet Sematary was something that Stephen King was going to write. And it seems like the reason that that didn't happen, like Romero was waiting around wanting to make that. It was material that like as a, like as a boomer dad spoke to him like very deeply. The way that it dealt with feelings about children and your fears about what could happen to your family, that sort of thing. It resonated, and he wanted to make that film, but the timing didn't work out. Partially because like Stephen King was, at the time they were trying to get this made, doing Maximum Overdrive,
Oh.
his directorial debut.
Which,
And
Romero probably should have directed.
well, I will also say that King was being unresponsive at this time. And if you know anything about Stephen King's biography at the time
Yeah.
of Maximum Overdrive, you can sort of read into what else was happening that was delaying this project, like cocaine.
Yeah.
I'm talking about cocaine. And I should say this is speculation on my part. It's a little better than speculation. It is an educated analysis of the situation that has no evidence whatsoever
I'm with you
of
though.
like that factoring into this. But
But still.
I do know that like Romero was so excited about it that he started doing storyboards that he drew himself. Like he was an artist. He was kind of more like a fun illustrator than like a fine artist,
Yeah.
and like he drew by hand like a bunch of storyboards based on a partial script that King had written. And then just like the timing never worked out for that, because eventually Romero had to take another job. This is post Day of the Dead. He had to do monkey shines if he wanted to keep working. And then like there's other like interpersonal complications with his producer, but it's mainly timing with that. Around the same time, he was also working on It, the miniseries with Tim Curry. Not that Tim Curry was on board at that point, but that was a script. So if for Pet Sematary, he was waiting for Stephen King to produce the script so he could film it. For this, there was a script. And I don't know what happened. I'm sure that it's just part of the like normal process of anything that gets made, in like TV/Hollywood, that directors come in and out for reasons that I would not fully understand. But that was a script that was written by Lawrence D. Cohen, and Romero had like
Are you talking about It right now? Just to be clear.
yeah, It. Sorry.
No, don't be.
Romero like had a lot of notes. He had a lot of suggestions about like how to deal with characters. He had one suggestion that I loved, which was that they really had to lose the spider aspect.
Smart.
Which my like deduction that my colleague Ben Rubin and I came up with. So they had a similar thing for Creepshow, because in the original story for The Crate, which is the one where there's where there's Fluffy, the like ape-ish monster from the Arctic.
Yeah.
That's a spider thing in the original story.
Oh, that's scary.
But Romero could never get that to work. Like he could never get it to like look convincing. Like it always looked like a 1950s sort of like rubber, monster sort of thing.
The ape was scary, so they made the right move.
No, it's great. We all love. Don't get me wrong, we love Fluffy. There's a Fluffy mural in my neighborhood.
Nice icon.
Yeah.
Bring back Fluffy. Anyway.
Yeah. But so my guess is that that's why he was like, maybe we shouldn't do a spider. We'll never make it look convincing.
Yep.
Let's try to think about other ideas. But there was like, a like 60 or 70 page document going through the script, scene by scene, line by line, with suggestions. And then who knows why that didn't work out. Probably, again, it was timing. Yeah.
Whoa.
So the last Romero King project was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Oh, I'm glad we're going to talk about this because
Yeah.
this is a book
So
I love.
so that is a project that Romero started working on like because he loved the book and he just like wrote a letter to Stephen King that's in the archive that just like is asking him like I love this book, can I
Would you
write
mind
a
if I just
script
tell
and maybe
people
make it?
briefly like what it's about?
Oh yeah, go for it.
So The Girl of Tom Gordon, I think came out in 1998, maybe 1999, is a story about a little girl who goes on a walk with her mom and older brother in the woods. And in order to stop hearing her family bickering and fighting, she kind of holds back and is sort of lost in her own world, and then finds that she is, in fact, very, very much lost in the woods. And as the story goes on, she gets more and more lost, and it becomes this very real, very emotional survival story of this preteen girl who has this obsession with baseball, lost in the woods, and doing her best to survive. And as the story goes on, she starts to sort of encounter monstrous creatures, and you're unsure if it's just because she's dehydrated or not. It's a little bit in vein of Gerald's Game in that way. And
Yeah.
it's, I would say, one of his only sort of YA appropriate novels, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's really lovely. And Romero started writing scripts for it. He worked on it like throughout the rest of his life, basically. Mainly in those first few years, like early 2000s. But it's still alive. And the version of it that's supposedly still in development, it's been a couple of years, so we'll see. But is like a descendant of that original Romero script. So
And
the director attached to it is Lynn Ramsey,
mhm.
who's one of the great living directors who does not get to make all that many films. And she would be the perfect match for the material.
Definitely. Big time. Am I
Yeah.
right to say I remember back in the day that another director attached was Romero's ex-wife at one point?
No, she wasn't a director. She was a screenwriter.
Oh, really? Okay. So
Yeah.
the only woman to ever be attached to my knowledge then would be Lynn Ramsey?
To direct, I think she's the first director other than George that has been
Oh, wow.
announced
Okay,
for
so
it.
it was going
And
to be
like
George.
maybe, I have not dug through the archives of Variety for this, but it was never planned
Okay, interesting.
to be directed by anybody but George. Yeah.
I would have loved to see what he could have done with it. Very cool. What time is it? Well, I think this might be good timing for us to sort of move into our next era of Romero. There is an unproduced Marvel, I believe, project he was working on called Copperhead. Could you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. So this was known by a few different titles, all of them pretty bad, because as we have discussed several times in this miniseries, George Romero is terrible at titles. So in 1980, 1981, George Romero meets Jim Shooter, who was at the time the editor in chief of Marvel Comics, Pittsburgh guy, very nice, very just like full of energy and ideas. And he's nice but prickly. It's a personality type that in Pittsburgh we're familiar with. Um, but he and George hit it off instantly, and they start cooking up a collaboration. It is a kind of before a proto RoboCop version of RoboCop. Like that was a few years off at this point. Um, it's a science fiction story that would be about like a soldier who is transformed into a like military robot for a futuristic fascist regime, and like the slow coming to realization and fighting over control over his own humanity sort of thing.
Okay.
It's really great. It's got like a bunch of kind of gloriously cheesy stuff to it, but also like big political ideas. Like it's a it's a science fiction movie that gave him a science fiction canvas, and he loved it.
I mean,
Um,
it's bizarre that we almost got a Marvel film out of
it would
Romero.
have been the first Marvel film. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Wow.
he and Jim Shooter were great collaborators. They worked together really well. They were the kind of collaborators who would do alternate drafts, and like every draft like improves on the last. The last one that was sent to the other. It would have been awesome. It would have been really great. And it's like I said, it's just bursting with ideas. It was, this was the era where Romero really wanted to get that big canvas, like
Mhm.
not for spectacle, although he obviously would have loved that too, but more because like he had all of these political critiques and wanted to like critiques is not the right word. He wanted to explore political ideas, societal ideas. And
Mhm.
in order to do that properly, he needed to depict the society
Yeah.
and have more than just like, you know, six people in a small space talking about the society or
Yeah.
embodying the society. He wanted to actually show it. And,
Yeah.
you can feel that excitement about like the scope, the grand
Yeah.
scope of this. Um, and it rules. Like he and Jim worked on this for 4 years about. It eventually peters out because they couldn't get any funding for it. There's a couple of advertisements for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Variety. I mean, this does not, like there's all sorts of unfilmed projects that are advertised in Variety as a way of like raising money for them.
Mhm.
But none of them call it Copperhead. They refer to it as something like the hero of the century is coming from Marvel Comics and Laurel Pictures or Laurel Entertainment or whatever it was at the
What
time.
what did they call it? Give me the title one more time.
The hero of the century,
The
but it
Hero?
was unclear that was like the title. It's
Okay.
unclear what it was about. It's just it's not a very helpful ad to see basically. Um but I love those scripts so much. They're phenomenal. And eventually like, word about RoboCop coming like being developed starts to come out, and that's like that is the final nail in the coffin, but it was
Okay.
dead long before then.
And then a little bit of offline information. I think I'm going to skip Monster Mash because we're at the hour mark and just
Yeah,
head
yeah,
directly into Golem.
yeah.
Um, well, okay, Copperhead sounds crazy, but another project that I was hoping we'd get some time to discuss today would be Romero's version of the Golem. For people that don't know, like what the traditional Golem story is, could you maybe give us some, you know, context?
Yeah, so this is like a traditional Jewish story coming from, I think, specifically Czechoslovakia, but also Eastern and Central Europe more broadly.
Can I pause you and say
Um,
that my grandfather is from what was once Czechoslovakia? Am I the Golem?
uh,
I
I
am.
think that's what that means. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, so Romero wasn't Jewish, but he was interested in this idea of the golem, in part because it is a monstery creature
Mm.
that does your bidding, but with limitations. And one of the limitations, according to the version of the story that George had heard or believed or you know wanted to use, is that the golem could do your bidding if your intentions and your heart were pure.
Mm.
And then if not, then if you were doing it for personal gain or for, something awful, for personal gain, for military gain, for whatever.
Mischief. Yeah.
Um yeah. That's what the armies of the world do as mischief.
That's
Yeah.
my opinion. Yeah. And I'm
But so
assuming that
he was
yeah,
interested
it
in
happens.
that.
Uh-huh.
And there's two Golem stories in his filmography, his oeuvre, let's
Mhm.
say, not filmography. One is a script from the 90s, mid 90s. Um, this is kind of early CGI. So he was clearly envisioning a monster that could do CGI stuff, that could morph and change shapes and like
Uh,
merge into shadows and
okay.
columns and other sorts of forms all over the place.
Mhm.
And the other was the last thing he ever finished. It's a short story called The Liberator.
Hmm.
Um, it was for a collaboration with an old friend, also named George from Pittsburgh, George Nama, um, who is a very accomplished visual artist. And the two of them collaborated on this gallery show that played a couple of different, like high-end, prestigious art galleries played. That was at a couple of
Mhm.
these places. Only like 3 months after Romero died. Um, so it was the last. It wasn't the last thing he was working on necessarily. That's a little.
But it's the last thing
There's
he
other
wrote, I
stuff.
guess.
It's the last thing he finished. Yeah,
Wow.
it's a short story.
Okay.
Um, so the script for the '90s version is wild. It's really fun, and I just love. I I love the basic setup, which is that the U.S. military has figured out that they can conjure a golem by using computers, basically.
Cool.
um, because the way that you bring a golem to life uh, is by having a piece of paper, putting a piece of paper with the correct sequence of Hebrew letters written on it into like the chest of the golem.
Who knew?
Well, so the military figures out that, like, well, we have computers. Let's print out every possible combination of Hebrew letters
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's
and put
possible.
that whole stack into this column that we've constructed, and then
That's
that will
smart.
bring it to life. And they are correct. It works, but their hearts were not pure. They wanted to
No, no,
use
no,
it
no, no.
for malicious purposes, for mischief.
Uh-huh.
That's the way to describe
It's
the
nice. It's
U.S.
a nice way.
military in the '90s, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were puckish, yeah.
Yeah, right. Little
Okay, so it
scamps.
doesn't go well.
It does not go well. So instantly, everybody involved becomes a target of this golem,
I love that.
um,
That's great.
and it's it's a wonderful script that like has not only like the most satisfying resolution of any of Romero's scripts, but like the only hopeful one,
Oh,
where like basically in the end, like the characters need to learn to be better.
I like that. It also
And
has
like
a yeah. Uh-huh.
well they like quote unquote defeat the golem, and it's
Oh,
people
that's too
who are
bad.
like aligned with the military but not like they're in the military but not of the military, let's say. um who like I said, they basically like learn to be better, and they realize at the very end, like, oh, whatever this defeat is, it's only temporary, and like if we ever step out of line again, like the golem might show back up and
I love it.
slice
Good.
our heads off or something.
It kinda has a mild ACAB vibe to it, which I do think ultimately is very Romero.
Yeah. Romero did not like authority,
I know, who
and he
does?
did not like you know oppression or violence on a like
Yeah.
he didn't like violence on a mass scale of any kind. Yeah. Whether it was a
He also doesn't
militia
yeah, and he doesn't
or
like
a
punching
mob.
down either, which is why he's
Yeah.
so great. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I am interested though, maybe to wrap us up, and a little bit more about the story.
The Liberator?
Yeah.
So this is a really poignant, very evocative, and kind of impressionistic short story about an elderly man, a Jewish man who had been in World War II, and had conjured a golem when he was there to help fight the fascists. This is a story that restates this idea that you have to be pure of heart and pure in your intentions in order to successfully get a golem on your side, and he is. But this takes place late in life. He's on his deathbed, and in a really interesting setup, he has a lot of children that he's kind of unofficially adopted. A lot of children that have just kind of come into his life. He's, it's sort of implied that because of this violence in his life in World War II, when he killed all of these fascists, all of these Nazis, that even though that was heroic, there was this toll that took on him. And so he was never married, never had any children of his own, but these orphans, or it's unexplained in a way that I think invites you to think about this in allegorical, metaphorical terms. These children have kind of accrued around him. And so he tells them about the golem and conjures it, and tells them that about he's dying, but this creature will be there to protect them, but that they can never use it for self gain or greed. They can never use it for vengeance or malice. That if they do, it will turn around on them. And the first thing that they do as soon as he's gone is to tell him jokingly to go get some money for him. And so it ends with this brief suggestion about how this this next generation is going to be chased by the golem forever, for the rest of their lives, because they couldn't see beyond their own immediate desires. Yeah.
It's so scary. And it kind of gives Frankenstein too.
It does. And it's interesting because it is in part a cranky old man sort of thing, complaining about the younger generation. But it also feels like Romero really trying to reckon with his own legacy, a legacy that's really wrapped up in not actual violence, but depictions of violence.
That's
and
true.
All of these people that have come after him, like I said, metaphorically, not his children, but these people that have just sort of gathered around him and that look up to him. And what has he taught them? What have they taken away from his films other than well, we can make some money off of this? It's touching as a self-examination that he wrote just in the last months of his life. It's beautifully written, and George Nama's illustrations are gorgeous.
Wow. I love that. I have to read that. I also think it's a really nice way for you and I to wrap up our conversations about Romero, sort of from start to finish. I really want to thank you for joining me for these 5 episodes. They've been really fascinating. The audience have really loved it. And, I have to ask, what's next for you? You've written this book on Romero, you're traveling in promotion of it. What do you foresee being on your horizon?
It's hard to say. I've been toying with the idea of trying to do a similar book on David Cronenberg, but there's not the same sort of archive that Romero has. So this would be a different project. It would be more about the decision is basically do I have enough to say about David Cronenberg that would interest people?
Although he is alive, so that could help.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited for The Shrouds,
Yeah, it
which looks like it'll be
weird.
out next year, probably. But I don't really know. I really enjoyed writing this book. It's been nice connecting with people. I'm assuming that most people listening don't know that, like, nonfiction books, but especially for an academic press, like, you make $0 off of this.
Well, now they know.
You do it because you are, like, passionate about it.
Yeah.
And want to share this stuff with an audience that will be appreciative.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found, I went into this, like, pretty self-deprecatingly depressed about the prospects of, like, well, so I love George Romero, but I don't know that there's, like, actually an audience out there. And it feels like there is. Like, people want to read this, and that's extremely gratifying. And yeah, like you said, I'm doing some more events. I'm talking with a couple of other places about doing stuff in the fall or over the summer. I'll
Mm-hmm.
be in Boston at the Coolidge Corner at the end of April, and then in Portland at the Hollywood, and in Seattle at the Northwest Film Forum and the Grand Illusion, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Talking George, introducing screenings, doing Q&As, and be towing some books with me to sign. And it's just really nice talking with people who love George Romero's movies. I spent so much time, like, thinking about this stuff,
I
and,
can
like, just getting it out of the world is nice. It's so
I can
satisfying.
imagine. And for people that want to make sure they're up to date on everything that you're doing, how can people find you online?
Well, so for however much longer Twitter lasts before, like,
Uh-huh.
completely descending into, like,
Hell.
the hell of
Yeah.
Elon Musk Nazi Twitter or whatever, I'm on there at M_Hulo, like the Jacques Tati film.
Mm.
And I'm Adam Hart on Blue Sky, but, like, I don't know, man. Social media is so much harder than it used to be. Like, who pays attention to what? I don't know. Uh, Trying, I don't know.
Oh, so you're
Dread
not on TikTok?
Central will. No, I'm not on TikTok.
What about
What happens on TikTok, as a middle-aged man, what happens on
it's not
TikTok
your
is
business.
none of my business.
No, nor your responsibility. What were you?
I hope that those kids are having fun.
Me
That's all
too.
that I. Yeah.
What were you just about to say about Dread Central?
Oh, I was going to say Dread Central will cover whatever I'm doing next, right, Josh?
100%. Yes. And yeah, just one last time, can you remind us, what's your book? Where can we find it?
Yeah, so it's called Raising the Dead, the work of George A. Romero. It's really fun. I put so much time and effort and excitement into this thing, and just really wanted to do George, to make George proud from whatever sort of non-religious afterlife he's looking down from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's available at all the normal places that you would get a book from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, it's been a blast talking to you about Romero these 5 weeks. Thank you for all of it. It's been great.
Yeah, this has been a blast. Thanks for this opportunity. People should feel free to reach out if they've read the book
Mm-hmm.
and have some questions or wanted to follow up on anything, or, like, if you want a Romero quote unquote expert to come introduce a screening or do a reading or something, let me know.
Thank you so much for listening to Development Hell. If you enjoy this podcast, then please do us a major favor of leaving us 5 stars and writing a positive review. It really makes all the difference in the world. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.